She didn't hear her sister's voice often anymore, but when she did, it carried the same tone it always had, measured, sharp, and final. The kind of voice that turned love into command. The last time Rachel Gardner said her sister's name, it was inside a police station. Fluorescent light, the smell of old coffee and colder silence. And in front of their mother, Rachel raised her chin, hand trembling only once before she steadied herself and read the charges aloud. Impersonation, federal fraud, disgrace to the family name. Opal Gardner didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply held her sister's stare, that quiet battlefield between blood and pride, and waited until the cuffs clicked shut. That was 3 years ago. But the story didn't begin in the station. It began the night the letter arrived, the night silence turned into a summons. Opal had spent the better part of her adult life surrounded by noise. Engines, radios, gunfire, wind slicing through desert and dust. But that Thursday night, the world outside her small apartment in Tacoma was silent. The kind of silence that felt intentional. She learned to read quiet like others read smoke. It meant something was coming. The letter was already waiting when she opened her door. Heavy paper, blue ink, her sister's handwriting sharp and deliberate, one line only. Dinner Sunday, 6 p.m. family only, Rachel. No warmth, no apology, just command, typical Rachel. Opal held it for a long time, running her thumb along the edge. The ink had smudged slightly, like Rachel had written it fast but made sure every letter looked official. Even her handwriting wore a badge. The room felt smaller as she read it again. 10 years since Clearwater, Oregon. 10 years since her father's funeral. 10 years since she'd told herself she wasn't coming back. Her commanding officer, Major Evans, passed by her open door, reading her face before reading the letter. "Rachel sent you something?" he asked. Opal nodded. "Yeah, one sentence." He smirked. "That's not dinner, that's a summons." She gave a dry laugh that died halfway out of her chest. In the military, silence meant discipline. In her family, silence meant exile. She tucked the letter into her jacket pocket, filed for 3 days' leave, and told herself she wasn't going home to reconcile, just to face the storm she'd run from. That night she sat by the window with a cup of black coffee gone cold and thought about her father, about his voice, gravel and kindness in equal measure. Loyalty starts at home, he used to say. Rachel believed that meant never leaving. Opal believed it meant never lying. A light knock broke her thoughts. A local officer stood in the hallway, hat tucked under his arm. "Message from Sheriff Gardner," he said, holding another envelope. Inside was her mother's address and a single line. "We'll all be there, don't be late." Opal looked at the words for a long moment, then folded the paper neatly, sliding it into her bag. "All right, Rachel," she murmured to the empty room. "Let's see what kind of dinner you've set." By the time she reached Clearwater, the late Sunday sun had already begun its descent, bleeding orange across the sky. The town looked smaller than she remembered, like someone had shrunk it just enough for the ghosts to fit comfortably. The same storefronts, the same leaning welcome home sign at the edge of Main Street, its paint peeling like skin. But the faces in the windows were older now, and their stares were no warmer. Mom's house sat on a hill overlooking the lake, its white siding scrubbed clean, 2 windows polished to reflection. Parked neatly in the driveway was Rachel's patrol car, polished like pride. The siren light caught the last flicker of sun, flashing one more warning. A small metal plate on the porch read, "Property under police protection." Opal couldn't tell if it was meant to protect her mother, or protect everyone else from her. Her mother answered the door before she could knock twice. The woman looked thinner, her eyes dimmer, her hands clutching the doorframe like she was holding the house upright by sheer will. "You came," she said, almost surprised. Then softer, "Don't argue tonight, sweetheart." Opal nodded. That old military instinct kicked in, orders first, questions later. Then Rachel appeared behind their mother, framed perfectly in the doorway. Crisp uniform, polished badge, chin high. "You actually made it," she said flatly. Opal managed a half-smile. "Didn't want to give you the satisfaction of saying I ran again." Rachel's lips curved, not quite a smile, more like victory. "Then sit, we have a full house." Inside, the dining room glowed too bright. Light bounced off glass, silver, and polite smiles. Two of Rachel's deputies stood by the archway, pretending to be guests. Across the table, familiar faces lined up like witnesses. Uncles, aunts, cousins, each avoiding her gaze but staring long enough to remind her she didn't belong here. Opal took her seat. The chair felt colder than it should. "What's the occasion?" she asked, her tone careful. Rachel's reply came smooth, practiced. "Just family dinner." Too smooth, too deliberate, the words of someone rehearsing a scene. Her mother's hands trembled as she poured wine. The picture of their father still hung on the wall, but it had been moved, from the center, to make room for a framed photograph of Rachel receiving her sheriff's badge. Even the air seemed to wait for her sister's permission before moving. Then Opal noticed him, a man outside by the porch rail, phone pressed to his ear, eyes darting toward the window, average build, leather jacket, familiar. The private investigator she'd warned off months ago. So Rachel had invited an audience. "Expecting company?" Opal asked. Rachel didn't look at her. "Dinner for family." But her eyes flicked briefly toward the window, enough to confirm it. Opal leaned back, crossing her arms. This wasn't dinner. This was a trial. Her mother kept pushing food toward her, small tremors in her hands. "Eat something," she whispered. Rachel filled the silences with questions that weren't really questions. "How work? How's life?" Still pretending to be okay. Laughter rippled down the table, the brittle kind that dies quickly. When it came to Opal's turn, Rachel leaned back. "So, still working for the Department of Defense, right?" she said casually. "Something like that," Opal replied. "Something secret, huh?" Rachel pressed, voice sweet but eyes sharp. "Something that pays the bills," Opal said, forcing a chuckle. Everyone laughed, except their mother. She just stared at her napkin like it might save her. Rachel poured herself another glass of wine. "You know, Dad would have been proud of me," she said, almost wistfully. "He always said loyalty starts at home." Then she turned, voice cooling. "You remember that, right?" Opal set her fork down. "I remember he said loyalty means doing your duty. Mine just had a different uniform." Rachel's smile sharpened. The air thickened. Someone at the far end of the table muttered, "She's not even in the system, you know." Rachel checked. Every head turned toward Opal. Rachel didn't deny it. She just twisted her sheriff's ring around her finger, the same way she used to crack her knuckles before a fight. That's when Opal saw it. A red folder on the chair beside Rachel, sealed under clear plastic, stamped with the sheriff's insignia. The bold print read, "Opal Gardner, Federal Fraud." Opal's pulse slowed, not quickened. It always did in moments like these. So this was it, Rachel's grand performance. Opal smiled faintly, leaning forward. "You really went that far, huh?" Rachel's voice stayed calm, almost triumphant. "Far enough to protect this family from a liar." "I hope you checked jurisdiction, Sheriff," Opal said softly. Her watch ticked once, a silent heartbeat. Outside, the night thickened. Rachel lifted her wine glass, setting it down with a soft thud, but the sound hit like thunder. She rose, uniform crisp, voice loud enough to carry to the deputies waiting by the archway. "Before dessert," she said, "I'd like to make something clear about my sister." Their mother's voice cracked. "Rachel, don't." But it was too late. Rachel held up the red folder, her badge catching the light. "These documents prove that Opal Gardner has been impersonating a federal officer." The room erupted in whispers, a few gasps, a spoon clattered to the floor. Rachel flipped through the pages, ID cards, photos, a classified warehouse, and delivered her verdict. The Department of Defense confirmed there's no record of her. Her mother's hand went limp. The wineglass tipped, spilling red across the white tablecloth like fresh blood. Rachel pressed on, voice breaking only once. She's been lying to us, to all of you, to Dad's memory. Opal didn't move, didn't speak, just shifted slightly in her chair, her hand brushing against her belt, the faintest press of a button, so small no one saw it. A silent distress ping, 12 minutes. Rachel unclipped her cuffs. "Opal Gardner," she said, "you're under arrest." The metal bit into her wrists, cold, familiar. Her mother screamed. Rachel didn't flinch. Behind her, one of the deputies raised his phone. The live icon glowed red. Not recording, streaming. The Clearwater Sheriff's Office was broadcasting her arrest. Rachel turned back, eyes glinting with triumph. For years my sister fooled this family, but tonight justice is served. Opal met her gaze steadily. "You think justice cares about your dinner show?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "You're not one of us anymore." Opal's voice came quiet, almost tender. "You're right, I'm not." Outside, a distant rumble, helicopter rotors or thunder, hard to tell. 6 minutes. The air inside the house had gone thin. Rachel hovered near the door, her deputies uncertain now, glancing between the sisters. "You know what's sad?" Rachel said, her voice cracking just enough to reveal the fear beneath. "People like you leave, come back, pretend to be heroes." Opal said nothing. Silence had always been her sharpest weapon. 5 minutes. The ping reached Fort Lewis. The OSDI team was already moving. Her mother's voice trembled. "Please say something, Opal." She didn't. Words were useless in moments like this. Rachel set her gun on the table beside the folder. "You know what's really sad," she said. "Mom still believes you." "No," Opal said softly. "She just doesn't want to see you like this." Then the sound, the front door opening. A cold wind swept through the hall. And from the kitchen came a calm, low voice. "Sheriff Gardner, set your weapon down." Every head turned. The voice repeated, firmer. "Now." Rachel spun, hand twitching toward her holster. Two figures stepped from the kitchen shadows. A woman in a black suit, a tall man with a federal ID. The air in the room shifted instantly, from accusation to command. The woman's tone was calm, final. "We received a distress signal from Colonel Opal Gardner," she said. Then she looked directly at Rachel. "Ma'am." Rachel froze. Her mother's breath caught. The hum of the helicopter drew closer. And for the first time that night, silence meant something else entirely. It meant authority had arrived. It meant the reckoning was no longer hers to control. The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it cut through the room sharper than any command. Rachel's hand froze inches above her holster. The two figures stepped fully into the dining room light, one woman, tall, composed, dark hair pulled tight into a regulation bun. The other, a man whose posture alone spoke of rank. Their presence shifted everything. The chatter, the fear, even the air seemed to hold its breath. "Sheriff Gardner," the woman said again, voice calm but edged with command. "Put your weapon on the table." Rachel's deputies hesitated, eyes darting between her and the newcomers. The taller man reached into his coat and flashed a badge. The emblem gleamed under the chandelier Federal Security Directorate. Rachel's voice cracked just enough to betray confusion. "This is a private residence," she said, forcing authority into her tone. "You can't." "We can," the woman interrupted. "And we are." She turned her gaze toward Opal, still seated, cuffs gleaming in the light. "Colonel Gardner, are you injured?" The words landed like thunder in the silence. Mom gasped. One of the cousins whispered something that died halfway out of their throat. Rachel blinked, the words not yet finding their place. "Colonel," she repeated, half in disbelief, half in denial. Opal stood slowly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. Her wrists were still bound, but her posture carried the same quiet authority that had once made grown soldiers fall silent mid-argument. "No injuries," she said evenly. The woman nodded once, her face unreadable. "Colonel, we'll take it from here." Rachel's hand trembled now. "You've got to be joking," she said, voice rising. "This woman is my sister. She's been pretending to be." The tall man turned toward her. His voice was steady, the kind that didn't need to raise volume to be obeyed. "Sheriff Gardner, you just detained a federal intelligence officer under classified directive. That's obstruction of national security." Every face in the room seemed to turn to stone. Mom gripped the edge of the table as if the truth itself had weight. "Opal," she whispered, what is happening?" Opal didn't answer yet. She didn't need to. The badges, the tone, the quiet precision of the agents, all of it spoke louder than anything she could say. Rachel's voice broke. "That's impossible, I checked. There's no record of her." The female agent looked at her evenly. "There wouldn't be." Rachel's deputies exchanged uncertain glances. One lowered his phone, realizing the live stream was still rolling. The red light on the screen blinked, still broadcasting to hundreds of viewers. "Turn that off," Rachel barked, but her voice lacked conviction. The female agent, Rollins, as her badge read, took 2 steps forward and plucked the phone from the deputy's hand. Her thumb tapped once. The feed froze, but not before Rollins read the numbers on the corner. 812 viewers, she said quietly. "Sheriff, you just live-streamed the detention of a federal operative. Congratulations." Rachel looked like she'd been hit. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Rollins said, sliding the phone into an evidence pouch. The tall man, Ortiz, moved toward Opal, unlocking the cuffs with practiced precision. The metallic click sounded like a verdict being reversed. Rachel stumbled back a step, her breath unsteady. "What is this?" she whispered. "Some kind of stunt?" Opal rubbed her wrists gently, the skin red from pressure. Her eyes met her sister. "You called it justice," she said softly. "Now you'll see what it really looks like." A deep hum began to vibrate through the walls, distant at first, then growing louder. Helicopter rotors. Rachel turned toward the sound, disbelief draining the color from her face. "You called them." "No," Opal said. "They came because you did." Mom covered her mouth as the noise grew closer, rattling the windows. Outside, the faint flash of searchlights swept across the yard, washing over the patrol car, the porch, and the small plate that still read property under police protection. For the first time, the words felt like irony. When the front door opened, the gust that entered carried the smell of cold air and authority. A man stepped inside, removing his gloves with slow precision. His uniform was dark, his bearing unmistakable. Major General Isaac Rowe. The room seemed to shrink around him. "At ease," he said quietly. His voice didn't demand obedience, it assumed it. "This won't take long." Rachel's face went pale. "General Rowe." He ignored her, his attention fixed on Opal. "Colonel Gardner," he said, "are you all right?" Opal nodded once. "Yes, sir." Her mother's eyes widened. "Colonel," she whispered again, as if the word might shatter if spoken too loud. Rachel took a step forward, her voice trembling. "She's not. This is a mistake. She's been." "She is," General Rowe cut in, "under my command." The words hit harder than any accusation. Rachel froze mid-sentence. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, before everyone, General Rowe turned toward Opal and saluted. The motion was clean, precise, absolute. "General's orders," he said. "You're clear." No one breathed. The deputies, once standing guard, now looked anywhere but at their sheriff. The cousins who'd laughed earlier stared at the floor. Even the chandelier seemed to flicker, unsure whether to keep shining on the wreckage below. Rachel stumbled back until her legs hit a chair. She gripped it for balance, eyes wide and unfocused. "You can't," she can't. General Rowe faced her. "Sheriff Gardner," he said evenly. "You just detained a federal officer acting under classified Directive Omega-12. That's interference with national intelligence operations. You are to stand down immediately." Rachel's hand found the back of the chair, knuckles white. "I didn't know," she said, voice breaking. "You didn't ask," he repeated quietly. The words seemed to echo against the walls. Outside, the flash of blue and red lights filled the windows, federal vehicles pulling into the driveway, agents moving with precision. The house that once hosted birthdays, Christmas dinners, and laughter now glowed under the glare of authority. Mom sat frozen, tears spilling quietly, her gaze moving between her daughters, one in a uniform of authority, the other stripped of it. Opal turned toward her. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly. "It's over." But her mother's eyes said something else. "No, it is." Rollins began reading rights, her tone calm and professional. "Sheriff Gardner, you are being detained pending federal review. You have the right to remain silent." The irony burned through the silence. Rachel had never been good at silence. Her voice came out small. "Opal, please, I was trying to protect us." Opal watched her, expression unreadable. "From what? The truth?" Rachel shook her head violently. "From humiliation, from becoming a family joke." Opal's tone softened, but her words didn't. "You didn't protect the family, Rachel. You just tried to protect yourself from being wrong." For a heartbeat, Rachel's eyes met hers, that flicker of the girl she'd once known. The one who'd learned to braid her hair, who'd thrown pebbles at her window on summer nights. And then it was gone. The deputy stepped forward. Rachel didn't resist as the cuffs closed around her wrists. The same sound that had marked Opal's humiliation minutes ago now echoed for Rachel. The same metal, the same click. The same silence afterward. Mom reached for her, but one of the agents gently stopped her hand. Rachel's shoulders trembled as she whispered something only Opal could hear. "I thought you were the liar." Opal looked at her sister, eyes calm, voice almost gentle. "I was just better at keeping secrets." General Rowe turned toward Opal again. "You did well," he said quietly. "You stayed composed." Opal gave a tired smile. "Staying composed is easy, sir, when you've already lost everything once." The general nodded, saying nothing. He understood. Rollins handed Opal a tablet showing the frozen feed. The stream went viral. Local media's already picking it up. Opal stared at the screen for a long moment, then handed it back. "Let it run. Truth deserves daylight." Rachel lifted her head, eyes red and wet. "You wanted me humiliated," she said. Opal shook her head slowly. "No, I wanted you to listen." Rachel gave a bitter laugh that broke halfway through. "Congratulations, Colonel, you won." Opal's reply came quiet and final. There was nothing to win. Outside, wind swept through the open doorway. The smell of rain mixed with the sharp sting of cold air and the distant thrum of rotor blades. When Rachel was let out, the flash of blue lights painted her face in fragments, red, then blue, then shadow. The neighbors watched from their porches, whispering behind hands. Clearwater had waited years for a scandal, and now it had one. Inside, the dining table still stood, plates untouched. Wine spilled across the cloth like blood that refused to dry. Opal removed the cuffs from her wrists and set them gently on the table. "Keep that," she told her mother, "as a reminder of what silence can survive." Tears fell freely now. "I don't even know who you are anymore," her mother said. Opal's eyes softened. "You never did," she said, "but that's all right." She walked toward the door, passing the photo of their father, his proud smile now caught between his two daughters' legacies. On the porch, Rollins caught up with her. "They'll probably promote you sooner than planned," she said quietly. "Rank doesn't fix what family breaks," Opal replied. No, Roland said, pausing, but it helps you stand taller when they try to push you down. Opal smiled faintly, looking back at the house, the warm yellow light bleeding through the curtains, fading like an old memory. She stood tall that night, not for the cameras or the ranks or even the truth. She stood tall for something quieter, something that didn't need to be proven anymore. As the helicopters lifted off and the sirens faded into the hills, Opal looked up at the dark sky. For the first time in 10 years, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace arriving late, but right on time. The courthouse didn't smell like justice. It smelled like disinfectant, coffee, and something colder, like the absence of belief. Winter had settled over Washington, soft and cruel, the kind of cold that made people whisper inside buildings built for truth. Opal Gardner sat alone at the long table, hands folded, eyes steady on the white wall ahead. Across from her, Rachel sat in a gray suit that looked a size too big, as if she'd borrowed someone else's life and couldn't quite fill it. There was no badge on her chest now, no gun at her side, just silence stretched taut between them. The presiding officer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Colonel Gardner, do you wish to press personal charges against the defendant?" Opal looked at Rachel. Her sister's eyes flickered, hope, shame, pride, all tangled into something wordless. "No, sir," she said softly. "The system already did." General Rowe sat beside her, unmoving. His silence had the kind of weight that only years of command could give. He'd seen too many wars end without peace, too many victories leave nothing but quiet. He gave a single nod, that was all. The prosecutor stepped forward, holding a folded piece of paper. "Your Honor, the defendant has submitted a statement before sentencing." The paper trembled faintly in his hand as he read. "I thought I was saving my family's name. Turns out I was only saving my pride." The words hung in the air like frost that refused to melt. Rachel stared at the table, her knuckles white, her voice gone. For a moment the courtroom was entirely still, the kind of stillness that comes after impact, the kind that hurts in waves. Opal lowered her eyes, studying the uneven strokes of blue ink, the same handwriting that had summoned her home with one command. "Dinner Sunday, 6 p.m. Full circle." The prosecutor's voice broke the silence. "Colonel Gardner, do you wish to respond?" Opal's answer came without hesitation. "No, sir. Some letters don't need an answer." The judge's gavel came down once, soft but final. "Sheriff Rachel Gardner," he said, "you are hereby sentenced to 6 years, reduced to 4 for lack of malicious intent." No one clapped, no one gasped. Justice, when it's real, is too quiet for applause. Rachel lifted her eyes, and for a heartbeat, Opal saw the younger sister she used to protect. The girl who used to chase her through the fields, shouting about fairness, pretending to be the law. Now she just looked tired. "I guess you got your justice," Rachel whispered. Opal stood calm but not unfeeling. "I didn't come here for justice," she said. "I came to stop a cycle." Rachel's lip trembled, her voice barely holding. "And what do you call this?" "Mercy," Opal said. "The kind you don't have to understand to deserve." When it was over, General Rowe rose beside her. Together they walked through the marble hallway, their footsteps echoing against the cold floor. "You could have destroyed her reputation completely," he said. "She did that herself," Opal replied. "I just didn't interfere." Rowe smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "That's the highest form of mercy." Outside, the city shone with hard light and harder truths. A young officer approached, saluting crisply before handing Opal a sealed envelope. "Effective immediately," he said. She broke the seal, reading the header. "Colonel Opal Gardner, reassigned to Joint Command Strategic Unit." She let out a slow breath. "Strange," she murmured. "The higher I go, the quieter it gets." Rowe looked ahead. "That's how real power sounds." They walked together until the courthouse steps ended and the wind began. When Opal reached the car, she looked up at the sky. It was the same pale gray as the walls inside, colorless, endless. She won nothing, lost nothing more. But she'd stopped something from spreading, something colder than hate. The engine hummed to life. Washington passed by in reflections and silence. That night Opal didn't sleep. She sat by her apartment window, watching the snow drift down through the yellow streetlight glow. Each flake hit the glass softly, then vanished, as if the world kept erasing itself 1 second at a time. She reached for her desk drawer, pulling out the photograph she always kept hidden, the one from Clearwater Lake. 2 girls barefoot, smiling, fishing lines tangling in the summer air. Rachel's grin had always been brighter. Opal used to think it was sunlight. Now she knew it was armor. She ran a thumb over the burn mark on the corner of the photo. She tried to destroy it once, the night after Afghanistan, when she thought memories only caused weakness. She stopped halfway through. Some things, she realized, aren't meant to be erased, just carried differently. The phone buzzed once. A message from General Rowe, briefing tomorrow, 700, don't be late. She smiled faintly. Yes, sir, she whispered to no one. Then after a pause she added softly, I won't. The snow kept falling, slow, deliberate, relentless. By morning, the city would be blanketed clean again, but no amount of white could cover what truth had already uncovered. And somewhere in a cell not far away, a woman who once wore a badge was learning what silence really meant. For the first time, Opal felt something close to peace. Not victory, not satisfaction, just peace, the kind that comes after you finally stop needing to be believed. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened to the quiet. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. 3 years had passed, but the silence still carried her name. Washington had changed. The skyline shimmered with new steel and old secrets, and the wind that blew through the Potomac carried the smell of ambition more than rain. From the 8th floor of the Pentagon's Joint Command Wing, Opal Gardner watched the city move beneath her, a rhythm of cars, orders, and invisible wars. She had learned to live quietly. Most people at Joint Command knew her only as Colonel Gardner. Few remembered Clearwater, fewer remembered Rachel. The files were sealed, the media storm forgotten, the incident written off as local jurisdictional conflict. The kind of phrase that hides a lifetime behind 2 neutral words. Inside her office, everything was deliberate. No clutter, no distractions. Maps of conflict zones pinned neatly to the far wall, lines of red thread crossing oceans. On her desk, between operational binders and secure tablets, lay one fragile relic, a photograph. 2 girls standing barefoot by a lake, one laughing, the other pretending not to. The sunlight captured them both, still believing they were on the same side. Opal turned it over. The back was charred, a reminder of a night she tried to burn it and couldn't. The knock at the door was soft, respectful. Colonel Gardner, the Joint Command is ready. She nodded, tucking the photo into a drawer. Tell them I'm on my way. The door closed, leaving her alone again. She straightened her uniform in the window's reflection, her eyes older now, steadier, yet carrying a fatigue that no rest could cure. Every day at Joint Command felt like walking through a mirror, seeing everything clearly but never feeling part of it. The higher she climbed, the lonelier the air became. Down the hall, the briefing room buzzed with controlled urgency. Generals, analysts, intelligence officers, each carrying fragments of information that, together, shaped the world's quietest battles. Opal entered without announcement. Conversations faded instantly. Colonel Gardner, one of the generals, greeted. Good of you to join us. Wouldn't miss it, sir, she said, taking her seat. On the screens, satellite images flickered, drone paths, coded transmissions, shifting heat signatures across foreign deserts. Her eyes moved. scanning details faster than most could read captions. Years of pattern recognition did that to a mind. While others debated logistics, Opal focused on rhythm. The pauses between attacks, the silences between signals. War, she had learned, spoke through absence as much as presence. After the meeting, General Rowe caught up with her in the corridor. His hair had turned almost white since Clearwater, but his presence hadn't dimmed. "Still can't get used to you outranking half the room," he said lightly. "I try not to notice," she replied. He studied her for a moment. "You've changed. So have the wars." He nodded. "True, but some battles are quieter, harder to spot." She didn't need to ask which ones he meant. They walked together toward the elevators. "How's your mother?" he asked. Opal hesitated. "Better, quieter. We talk sometimes about the weather, about the lake, never about Rachel." Rowe nodded again, his gaze softening. "Maybe that's enough." When the doors closed behind him, Opal stood for a moment, alone with her reflection. For years she'd defined herself by motion, missions, ranks, objectives. But lately, stillness had begun to frighten her more than chaos. She returned to her office as evening fell. The city outside shimmered under a sheet of rain. Somewhere below, sirens wailed faintly, ordinary ones this time. She sat at her desk, flipping open a small, leather-bound notebook she used instead of digital logs. The entries were short, precise. Not for memory, just for control. 17:30 mission review with Rowe complete. Sector data inconclusive. 19:00 reassessment scheduled. Weather worsening, feels like winter early. 22:15 dreamt of Clearwater again. Woke up angry, not sad, progress. She paused, pen hovering over the page, then added one more line. Still haven't decided if forgiveness needs to be spoken to exist. She closed the book. The weight of command wasn't medals or rank. It was knowing which ghosts to keep close and which to let go. The next morning arrived gray and silent. Snow brushed against the Pentagon windows like static. Opal was halfway through her second coffee when a courier arrived at her door. "Delivery for Colonel Gardner," he said, handing over a small, unmarked envelope. She frowned. "From?" "No return address, ma'am." He left before she could ask more. The envelope was light, its edges softened by travel. She opened it carefully. Inside lay something metallic, cool against her skin. A badge. Old, scratched, sheriff's insignia faintly visible through years of wear. Her breath caught. Beneath it was a note, folded twice, shaky handwriting. "Maybe I should have asked, R." Opal sat back slowly, the room suddenly too quiet. The snow outside fell harder now, smudging the city into ghost shapes. She turned the badge over in her hands. It was heavier than it should have been, metal, guilt, memory, all condensed into one object. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out another relic, the letter that had started it all. Blue ink, commanding tone. "Dinner Sunday, 6 p.m. She laid them side by side, the letter and the badge, beginning and end. A summons and a release. Her reflection in the glass showed two versions of herself, the soldier and the sister, neither complete, both true. She picked up the badge again, tracing its edge with her thumb. Her voice came barely above a whisper. "I forgive you," she said. Not to Rachel, not to the past. To the part of herself that had spent years waiting for permission to heal. She placed the badge carefully back in the drawer, beside the photo and the letter, closing them away, not hidden but resting. Outside, the snowfall thickened, muffling the world into stillness. In the distance, the city lights flickered faintly through the white. The hum of traffic became a low, steady rhythm, the sound of life continuing without ceremony. For the first time in years, Opal didn't feel the need to control it. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Major Evans. "Heard you made strategic lead. Congrats, Colonel." She smiled faintly. "Thanks, Major, it's quieter up here." "Quieter's good," he replied. "Means you're doing it right." She looked out the window again, at the falling snow, at the faint reflection of a woman who had finally stopped running from her own silence. "Maybe," she whispered, "quiet's not just peace. Maybe it's proof you've survived the noise." She turned off the lights, letting the city's glow fill the room. The desk remained as she'd left it, badge and letter side by side, like old adversaries finally resting. Outside, the snowfall didn't stop, it only softened. And for Opal Gardner, the stillness no longer felt like exile. It felt like home. The war room was never silent, but tonight it was close. Dim light washed over steel tables and walls lined with monitors. Outside the reinforced windows, Washington slept under a haze of snow, its noise softened to a distant hum. Inside, the hum was mechanical servers, ventilation, human tension disguised as calm. Colonel Opal Gardner stood at the head of the table, one gloved hand resting on a classified dossier. Around her, intelligence officers and analysts spoke in clipped tones, words like coordinates and probabilities cutting through the stillness. General Rowe leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "The directive comes straight from Joint Command. We intercept, contain, and extract. No public eyes, no paper trail." Opal nodded. "What's the target?" A technician pressed a key. The main screen flickered to life, showing a grainy satellite image, an abandoned coastal facility on U.S. soil. "Used to be a storage hub for decommissioned defense tech," the tech explained. "Now it's off record. We picked up encrypted transmissions bouncing from that grid. Someone's trying to sell classified drone architecture to an unregistered buyer." Rowe looked to Opal. "We need quiet precision, no leaks, no second chances." "Understood," she said. But something about the image felt wrong. The coordinates were too close to home, Clearwater County jurisdiction. Her pulse slowed, instinct kicking in. "Sir," she said carefully, "that area falls under the same precinct that once reported Sheriff Rachel Gardner as active." The room went still for half a breath. Rowe's brow tightened. "She's not involved, Colonel. She's been out of service 3 years. "Still," Opal said quietly, "the location's familiar, and familiarity can blind us." He held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. "Take your pick of personnel, full discretion. You leave tonight." The meeting adjourned, papers shuffled, voices lowered. As everyone filed out, Rowe stopped her at the door. "Gardner," he said, tone softer now, "don't let ghosts slow you down." She offered a faint smile. "Sir, ghosts don't slow me down, they just remind me where I've been." The snow had stopped by the time her convoy reached the coast. The moon carved pale lines over the black water, and the wind tasted of salt and memory. The facility loomed ahead, 3 warehouse buildings, 1 collapsed roof, and a watchtower still barely standing. Power cables hung like torn veins against the sky. Opal moved through the darkness with her team, 4 agents, silent, efficient. Each motion rehearsed, the kind of quiet that could either save you or bury you. "Thermal shows 2 heat signatures inside," one agent whispered. Opal raised her hand for silence. They breached the main door. The air inside was damp and metallic, the kind that sticks to your lungs. Footsteps echoed softly as flashlights swept across broken crates and dust-caked consoles. Then a voice cut through the static of the dark. "I thought you'd come yourself." Opal froze. The voice was older, worn by time, but she knew it instantly. "Rachel." The beam of a flashlight caught her standing near the far wall, hands raised slightly, no weapon visible. She wore civilian clothes, a weathered jacket, and an expression Opal couldn't read. "Stand down," Opal ordered, her tone sharp but quiet. Rachel smiled faintly, always the commander. One of the agents stepped forward, weapon ready. Opal motioned him back. "What are you doing here?" Rachel nodded toward a crate beside her, stopping someone worse from finishing what I started. Opal approached cautiously. The crate's lid was already open, revealing military-grade drives marked with federal encryption seals. "Where did you get these?" Rachel's voice softened. "Same place you did, the system." The air thickened. "You shouldn't be here," Opal said. "I know," Rachel replied, "but someone had to make sure it ended right this time." Opal stared at her sister, the face she'd avoided in dreams, the voice she'd buried under discipline. "You expect me to believe you're cleaning up leaks for redemption?" Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. "No, I just couldn't stand the thought that my mistakes would become someone else's war." Silence settled, heavy but not hostile. Behind them, the sound of boots on concrete, two unknowns entering from the rear. Opal's hand went to her sidearm. "Contacts," whispered an agent through the comm. "Not ours," Opal said. Gunfire cracked the stillness. Concrete chips exploded near the wall. The team dropped to cover. Rachel hit the ground, hands over her head. "Two hostiles," Opal barked. "Suppressive fire left flank." The agents returned fire, clean and controlled. Sparks flared from metal beams. Opal moved fast, sliding behind a crate. Through the narrow sightline she saw one of the intruders, black coat, mask, foreign patch. She exhaled, aimed, and fired once. The figure fell. The second fled into the shadows. Moments later, silence reclaimed the room. Only the sound of dripping water and quickened breath remained. Opal signaled all clear. Rachel stood slowly, eyes wide. "You always did have timing." Opal holstered her weapon. "You always did have bad company." Rachel laughed once, the sound brittle but real. "Fair." One of the agents approached. "Colonel, we've got encrypted drives and a dead contact. What's the protocol?" "Extraction," Opal said. "Secure the assets and alert command." She turned back to Rachel. "You're coming with us." Rachel's jaw tightened. "As a prisoner." "As a witness," Opal replied. Rachel hesitated. "Will they even listen?" "They will if I say they should." Their eyes met. Soldier and sister, law and guilt. The space between them smaller than it had ever been, but still wide enough to feel like an ocean. By dawn, the facility was sealed, the bodies removed. The snow began again, erasing footprints as fast as they were made. In the back of the armored vehicle, Rachel sat beside Opal, her wrists cuffed lightly, not in punishment but in precaution. "Funny," Rachel said quietly. "You saving me from a crime scene. Tables turn fast." Opal didn't look at her. "You're lucky I came instead of someone else." "I didn't send the transmissions," Rachel said, "but I tracked them. Someone was using my old credentials. Probably thought I'd still be desperate enough to sell what I knew." Opal's jaw tensed. "Were you?" Rachel looked out the window at the snow. "Once, not anymore." The vehicle rolled through the fog. "You didn't have to come," Opal said finally. Rachel smiled faintly. "Maybe I did. I still owe you a truth." They rode in silence the rest of the way, the hum of the engine steady like a heartbeat. When they reached the base, Rachel was escorted for debriefing. Opal stayed behind, standing in the cold wind that swept through the hangar. General Rowe appeared moments later, coat drawn tight. "You all right?" he asked. Opal nodded, "Just tired." "I saw the report," he said. "You did what was necessary." "Necessary doesn't mean right," she replied. He studied her a long moment. "Sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're not. That's what makes you good at this." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, where dawn was breaking pale over the water. Rowe rested a hand on her shoulder. "You saved her life, Colonel, whether you meant to or not." Opal's voice was almost a whisper. "Maybe this time she'll save her own." When he left, she stood alone, watching the first light of morning climb over the sea. The wind cut cold across her face, sharp but clean. Her reflection in the glass of the hangar door stared back, strong, quiet, haunted, and whole. For the first time in years, she didn't see a uniform. She saw a person. The mission was over, but something deeper had shifted. Some wars don't end with ceasefires. They end with understanding. And as the sun rose over the snow-covered coast, Opal Gardner finally understood the simplest truth of all. Peace doesn't always arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it comes disguised as responsibility you choose to carry anyway. The debriefing room at Joint Command wasn't built for comfort. It was built for clarity. Steel walls, one table, two chairs, one truth if you were lucky. Colonel Opal Gardner sat in the far chair, posture rigid, eyes calm. Across from her, behind reinforced glass, sat Rachel Gardner. Civilian clothes, wrists free but watched. Her reflection shimmered faintly against the window, two sisters divided by a pain thicker than forgiveness. The hum of the ventilation was the only sound. The door opened softly and General Rowe entered, a file in hand. He nodded to Opal. "Colonel." "Sorry." He glanced toward Rachel, then to the guards posted near the door. "Give us the room." When they were alone, Rowe placed the file on the table, flipping it open. "The board has cleared you of any procedural breach," he said. "Your decision to extract the witness rather than eliminate the variable was unconventional, but it worked." Opal gave a short nod. "I thought it would." Rowe leaned on the table, studying her. "You also requested full debrief oversight for the witness. I'm not sure that's wise." "It's necessary," she said quietly. Rowe sighed. "You think you can interrogate her objectively?" "I'm not here to interrogate her," Opal said. "I'm here to understand what kind of danger still exists." He studied her face, then gave a faint nod. 10 minutes, keep it clean." He left. The door sealed behind him with a soft, hydraulic hiss. Opal turned her chair toward the glass. Rachel looked up at the sound, her eyes dim, her expression unreadable. "Still giving orders, huh?" Rachel said. "Still ignoring them," Opal replied evenly. Rachel smiled barely. "Guess we're consistent." Silence settled again. Through the glass, a red light blinked, the camera recording everything. Opal ignored it. "You shouldn't have been there," Opal said. "If something had gone wrong, I couldn't have." She trailed off. Rachel's tone softened. "You couldn't have what? Saved me again." Opal, jaw tightened. "You put yourself in the middle of a classified breach." "I didn't plan it that way," Rachel said. "But once I realized what was happening, I had a choice: walk away or do something useful for once." "Useful doesn't mean safe." "Safe never fixed anything." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them carried the weight of everything left unsaid: apologies, pride, years of silence. Rachel leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You ever think about how we ended up here?" "Every day," Opal said quietly. Rachel nodded. "So do I." She paused. "You were always the one that looked forward. I was the one who looked around. You joined a world that respected you. I stayed in one that didn't. Maybe that's why I became what I did." Opal's eyes softened. "You didn't become what you did because of me, Rachel. You became it because you couldn't forgive yourself for being wrong." Rachel gave a hollow laugh. "You sound like Dad." Maybe he was right. Rachel's gaze dropped to her hands. They trembled faintly, just enough for Opal to notice. "I keep thinking about that night," she said. "The dinner, the cuffs, the camera. I thought I was protecting his name. Turns out I was just trying to prove I wasn't the failure everyone thought." Opal didn't move. "You weren't a failure, you were afraid." Rachel looked up sharply. "Afraid of what?" "Of being second." The words hit harder than a slap. Rachel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then finally she whispered, "You really believe that?" Opal leaned forward, her voice low, steady. "I believe you spent your whole life trying to outrank a ghost that wasn't chasing you." Rachel's eyes glistened. And what about you, Colonel? You spent yours trying to earn silence from people who stopped listening. Opal hesitated, then nodded slightly. Maybe we both made careers out of running from something we didn't understand. For the first time, they both laughed, soft, broken but real. It didn't erase anything, but it loosened something invisible between them. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly. They said you could have sent me back to prison. Why didn't you? Opal exhaled slowly. Because you already served your sentence. You've been living in it since Clearwater. Rachel looked away. So what happens now? You testify. You tell the truth about the network that used your name. Then you go home. Rachel gave a tired smile. Home, I don't even know what that is anymore. Opal's voice softened. It's not a place, Rachel. It's the moment you stop fighting who you were. Rachel nodded slowly, eyes shining under the sterile light. You always make it sound easy. It isn't, Opal said, but it's possible. The intercom clicked once. Colonel Gardner time. Opal stood. That's all for today. Rachel rose too. You know, she said quietly, if I'd listened to you years ago, maybe none of this would have happened. Opal's reply was calm, almost gentle. If you'd listened, you wouldn't have found your own way back. Sometimes falling apart is what teaches us where we stand. Rachel gave a small, tired laugh. You really did become Dad. Opal allowed herself a faint smile. He'd like to hear that. The guards entered, escorting Rachel out. For the first time, Rachel didn't resist. She just turned once at the door and met Opal's eyes. Tell Mom I'm still trying, she said. I know, Opal replied. She already does. The door closed. Opal stood alone in the empty room. The hum of the lights, the faint click of the recording system, everything returned to order except the rhythm of her breathing. She turned toward the glass. Her own reflection stared back, older, steadier, carrying both rank and regret in equal measure. Roe re-entered quietly. How'd it go? She's not lying, Opal said. Someone used her name, she's clean. Roe nodded. You did good. She's not a soldier anymore, sir. She's just a person. So are you, he said. Opal looked at him, then back to the empty chair across from hers. No, sir, she said softly. I just learned to sound like one. Roe's face softened. You've carried this long enough, Colonel. You can set it down now. Maybe someday, she said, but not yet. When he left, she sat back down, tracing a faint scratch on the metal table. The echo of Rachel's laughter still lingered, fragile but alive. For the first time, Opal didn't feel like she'd lost a sister. She felt like she'd found the last piece of the truth. Outside the debriefing room, the corridor lights dimmed to evening mode. Opal walked out slowly, her boots tapping against the floor, a sound rhythmic and steady, like closure disguised as motion. Some wars, she realized, don't end when the mission does. They end when you finally understand why you fought. The first alarm didn't sound like danger, it sounded like static. A low, pulsing buzz threaded through the Pentagon corridors, faint enough that most people ignored it. But Opal Gardner had spent her life listening for the things others didn't hear. By the time the second alarm hit, sharper, louder, urgent, she was already moving. She reached her office in under a minute. The glass wall that framed the city now flashed with red light. The screens on her desk glowed alive, lines of encrypted code racing faster than human eyes could follow. Colonel Gardner, came the voice over intercom. We have a network breach, classified channels, internal route, origin unknown. Her pulse stayed steady, but her mind sharpened like steel. Lock all external nodes, she ordered. Route through black firewall sectors and isolate. Yes, ma'am. A pause, then, Colonel, the signature looks like your clearance code. The air froze. Run it again, she said quietly. We did 3 times. Her eyes narrowed. Pull logs, command trace everything now. The words barely left her mouth when General Rowe appeared in the doorway, coat thrown over his shoulders. "Tell me it's not what I think it is." "They're using my authorization key," Opal said. "Someone cloned my credentials." Rowe's voice dropped low. "That's impossible. Your codes are level black." "It was impossible," she said, "until tonight." He stepped closer. "Could this be connected to Clearwater?" "Everything eventually is," she murmured. They stared at the screen as a map flickered, data pings spreading across defense grids like a virus unfolding. Rowe's jaw tightened. "They're after Joint Command assets. This is coordinated." Opal typed fast, bypassing firewalls only she could access. Her fingers moved from memory, pulling command trees, rerouting encryption, shutting gates. For every door she closed, 2 new signals appeared. "They're inside the loop," she said. "Someone knows the architecture." Rowe exhaled slowly. "Colonel, could it be her?" Opal froze. "Rachel." Her sister's face flickered uninvited in her mind, calm, composed in the debrief room, saying she wanted to testify. "She's still in holding," Opal said. "She doesn't have access." "Someone does," Rowe replied. "And if her name was used once, it can be used again." The intercom buzzed. "Colonel, we've traced the breach vector. It's bouncing through a shadow relay registered to an old Clearwater account." Her blood went cold. "Rachel's terminal," she whispered. Rowe turned to her sharply. "How?" "It was confiscated years ago. They said it was decommissioned." He stared at her, voice rough. "We both know nothing in this system is ever decommissioned." Minutes later, Opal strode into the sublevel server wing, her boots echoing against the metal floor. Rows of blinking lights stretched like arteries feeding into the building's heart. Technicians moved aside as she entered the control node, eyes wide. "What do we know?" she demanded. "Someone reactivated a dormant node from the sheriff's archive," one analyst said. "It's broadcasting a ghost code sequence, an imitation of your clearance. Every firewall reads it as authorized command." "What's the payload?" "Unknown, but the code is adapting. It's learning as it moves." Opal stepped closer to the main console, her reflection caught in the black glass. A soldier framed in red warning light. "I want full manual override," she said. "Disconnect digital authentication. I'll take it from here." Rowe's voice came over comms. "You do that, you'll have 10 minutes before the system locks you out permanently." "I only need 5. Her fingers flew across the console, shutting down automation protocols, rerouting command flow through analog lines. She bypassed 3 safeguards and entered a blind code sequence, one known only to field operatives from her old division. The system hesitated, then flickered. The red glow softened, shifting to amber. Rowe's voice came again. "You've got control." "Temporarily," she said. "But whoever's doing this knows my patterns. They're predicting me." Her gaze hardened. "This isn't random, it's personal." By dawn, the breach had collapsed into one final node, a signal coming from an external relay near the coast. Rowe entered her office again, eyes drawn with fatigue. "We've got the location. Abandoned comms hub 2 miles from Clearwater base perimeter." "Of course." She holstered her sidearm, grabbing her coat. "Colonel," he said, voice low, "you don't have to go yourself." "Yes, I do," she said. "If it's a ghost, it's mine to bury." The drive to Clearwater was long, the morning pale and washed of color. The same road she'd taken years ago stretched before her like a memory trying to repeat itself. When she reached the coast, fog blanketed everything. The comms hub sat half-collapsed, windows shattered, the ground frozen in frost. Inside, the hum of power still lingered. Someone had restored minimal energy to the grid. Opal moved cautiously, flashlight cutting through dust and shadow. Her breath fogged in the cold. At the center of the room, she found it. A terminal screen alive with shifting lines of code. and in front of it a figure. Rachel. Her hair was longer now, her frame thinner, but her eyes, those same storm-gray eyes, met Opal's without fear. "I told them I'd finish what I started," Rachel said quietly. "This was my fault once. It won't be again." Opal froze. "What have you done?" Rachel stepped aside, gesturing to the terminal. "Someone rebuilt the old system under my credentials. I traced them here. I'm shutting it down." "You accessed a classified relay," Opal said sharply. "You're compromising federal systems." "I'm fixing what's broken," Rachel snapped. "No one else would listen." The code on the screen scrolled faster. Opal saw it then, the same ghost signal from the Pentagon. It was looping through her own ID, bouncing between servers. Rachel typed quickly, sweat tracing down her temple. "It's self-replicating. The only way to stop it is to terminate the route manually." "That'll fry the whole network," Opal said. "You'll destroy half the defense links." Rachel looked up. "Then you'd better tell them to build better ones." The terminal began to hum, warning lights blinking. "Rachel, step back," Opal ordered. "No," Rachel said softly. "This is what I should have done years ago, stop the damage before it spread." The light grew brighter, the hum rising to a scream. Opal lunged forward, trying to pull her sister away. Rachel turned, smiling through tears. "You once told me silence could survive anything. Maybe it can survive this too." Then she hit the final key. A burst of white light flooded the room. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, sound, motion, thought. Then the terminal went dark. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Smoke curled from the console. Sparks died one by one. Rachel slumped against the wall, breathing hard but alive. "It's done," she whispered. Opal knelt beside her. "You could have died." Rachel's smile was faint. "Would have been fitting, don't you think, dying to clean up my own mess?" Opal shook her head. "No, you don't get to write that ending." Rachel looked at her sister, the soldier, the leader, the woman who'd survived everything but forgiveness, and whispered, "Then write it better." Opal helped her stand. The cold air rushed in through the shattered windows, carrying with it the faint sound of waves breaking on the rocks below. Outside, the sky was turning pale gold. The first light of morning touched the water, calm and indifferent. Behind them, the dead terminal blinked once, then stayed dark. Opal stared at it for a long moment. "You really think it's over?" Rachel gave a weary nod. "For once, yeah." They walked out together, side by side into the dawn. For the first time in years, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like understanding. And as the morning light fell across her face, Opal Gardner realized something she hadn't felt in a long time. Sometimes, the only way to defend what matters is to let go of control. Sometimes, the hardest part of command is learning when to trust that the world can heal without you. 2 weeks later, the report was ready. Opal Gardner sat in her office long after the lights of the Pentagon had dimmed. Outside, the city was quiet, its towers blurred by mist. The folder on her desk felt heavier than paper had any right to be. Inside it, every action, every choice, every loss. The last remnants of a story she hadn't chosen but had seen through to its end. The final entry read, "Operation Clearwater, containment complete, breach neutralized, 0 casualties." 0 casualties. That was true only on paper. She leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting toward the window. Washington glowed faintly through the haze, distant and detached. The city didn't know what she'd done to keep it safe. It never would. That was how this world worked, the quiet victories buried beneath louder failures. Her intercom buzzed once. Colonel General Rowe on his way up. She straightened slightly. "Send him in." Moments later, Rowe stepped inside. He looked older, his movements slower, but his eyes carried the same unyielding clarity. "I read your report," he said, closing the door behind him. Concise, too concise. Opal smiled faintly. You taught me brevity, sir. I taught you precision, he corrected, not omission. She nodded. What did I miss? Nothing, he said after a pause, except yourself. She looked at him, unsure what to say. Roe walked closer, resting his hands on the edge of her desk. You've been in 100 battles and survived them all, but this one, you've been carrying it like it still hasn't ended. Because it hasn't, she said quietly. He studied her face. Rachel. Opal hesitated. They cleared her today, she testified. The board's assigning her to the Civilian Oversight Committee for Rehabilitation Programs. Roe raised an eyebrow. She's going to rebuild the system she once broke. That's what she asked for, Opal said. I think it's her way of staying accountable. Roe's expression softened. Maybe she learned from the best. Opal shook her head. She learned from the consequences. He smiled slightly. Same thing in the end. They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the distant city barely audible through the glass. Do you ever wonder if we get used to this? She asked. To what? The quiet after the storm. The space where nobody thanks you, nobody blames you, they just move on. Roe thought for a long moment. No, Gardner, you don't get used to it. You just learn to live inside it. He turned toward the door, then stopped. There's talk upstairs, he said. Joint Command wants you to take the Strategic Defense Council seat. Opal blinked. That's 4 ranks above my clearance. Roe smiled. They don't care. You stopped the biggest domestic infiltration in 10 years. They want someone who can see what others overlook. She sighed. Higher I go, the quieter it gets. Roe nodded. That's how you know you're leading, not following. When he left, the room felt larger somehow. She stared at the empty space he'd left behind, her own reflection mirrored in the window again. Outside, the wind began to rise, brushing the flag at the far end of the courtyard. For a long while, she watched it ripple, strength disguised as movement. A soft knock came at the door. Come in. A young ensign entered, barely 20, uniform too new to fit right. Colonel Gardner, a courier left this for you. He handed her a small envelope, plain, unmarked. Who from? No signature, ma'am, just a note on the back. She flipped it over. The handwriting was careful, hesitant. For when you're ready to stop carrying both of us. Inside the envelope was a small photograph, 2 girls at Clearwater Lake, barefoot, laughing, the same one she'd burned but whole again. Opal stared at it for a long time, her throat tightening. The burn mark was gone. The photo had been restored. She turned it over. On the back, a single line written in blue ink. You were right, silence can survive anything. No signature, but she didn't need one. Opal stood slowly, setting the photo against the window where dawn would hit it come morning. Then she opened her drawer and took out the badge, the old sheriff's insignia, and placed it beside the picture. The 2 objects, once symbols of conflict, now sat side by side like peace offerings left to time. She exhaled slowly. In the morning, she would accept the council seat. She would brief her officers, sign new directives, and lead with the same composure that had always defined her. But tonight, she allowed herself a small act of rebellion, feeling. The city lights blurred outside the window. Somewhere beyond them, her sister was starting over. Somewhere beneath them, soldiers she'd never meet were sleeping safe. She poured herself a small glass of water, raised it slightly to the photograph, and whispered, "To survival." The glass trembled slightly as she set it down. Outside, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, washing the city in pale gold. She watched as it reached her desk, touching the edge of the photo, then the badge, and finally her hand. For the first time in years, she didn't move away from the light. She let it find her. Her voice came barely above a whisper, meant for no one but herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, she said. It simply acts. And as the sun rose higher, the quiet filled the room, not with emptiness, but with everything that had finally found peace in silence.